Street Beast family, what's up, y'all? Face with ya. That time of the week where I gotta make MMA and grappling fans think that I hate their sport. I don't. Sometimes I just encounter stuff online that boggles my mind. So, first, let me say this. I'm going to talk about grappling and street fights. And I'm going to list why I believe I have the expertise or the knowledge to speak on it. Now, I never like telling people how many street fights I've been in, etc., because there's so many people out here that exaggerate, lie, and those dudes that say they've been in hundreds of street fights, mostly are liars. All I can tell you is this. I spent 11 years in prisons and lockups, maximum security state prisons, medium security. So you can imagine I encountered a lot of violent people and a lot of fights in there. Secondly, I ran the streets from age 13 all the way up to 25, okay? I've been in more than my share of street fights, and I've witnessed a lot more than I've witnessed a lot, okay? And what I can't stand is the myth, and it is a myth, and I'm going to tell you where it came from. The myth, 90% of street fights end up on the ground. Absolute bullshit. Absolute and utter bullshit. Look, I would say I don't know where that saying even came from, but I do know. The Gracies, back when they introduced jiu-jitsu to the world, now, the world knew about jiu-jitsu to a degree, but the Gracies took its visibility to another level. They were trying to sell their self-defense system, their self-defense DVDs, and that was one of their statements they used for marketing, that 90% of street fights go to the ground. Except it's not true. It's not true at all. I know, and I'm not just going to use my experiences. I know in all the fights I got in, probably 10% of them was grappling. And probably only 2% was real rolling around on the ground grappling. When I say 10% grappling, oh, we're tied up against a wall, up against a car. There was no real rolling around, flopping around grappling. Okay? But never mind my fights. All the street fights, and especially prison fights that I witnessed, very few went to the ground. Now, to prove my point, here's what I'm going to do for you. Go on YouTube or whatever video sharing app you want and just type in street fight. Don't type in street fight grappling. Just type in street fight. Go through the list. Watch the hundreds of fights that pull up. And count how many end up on the ground. Now, I just did this test with somebody else the other day, and very, very few ended up on the ground. And, when people say that, and people repeat and regurgitate that myth, they got visions of dudes flopping around on the ground, executing arm bars and triangle chokes. Most street fights don't have the time to do all of that. I posted this video on Facebook talking about this. And people said, MMA is basically the most realistic situation for a real world fight. I'll put it this way, as far as sporting fights go, I agree. But it's not even close to the real world. Think about it. An MMA cage is set up perfectly for grappling. It's set up perfectly for grappling. The cage is meant so you can lean against it comfortably and not get scraped, cut up, or poked. The mats are made so you can slam on them comfortably. But the real world is not set up for grappling. You grapple on the streets, you're getting slammed on concrete, ran into car doors, ran into bar stool tables, etc. It's not set up perfectly. Okay? In fact, it's dangerous to grapple in street fights, in barroom fights, etc. Okay? Aside from that, we've talked about it many times, and you know, guys hate to hear this, but this is a fact. Most street fights only last 30, 40, 50 seconds. Max. Again, do the test I told you to do. Go watch 200 street fights in a row. Go watch it. Okay? The fact is, when you see high-level jiu-jitsu guys in the sport of MMA working, and they work for 1 minute and 30 seconds to get on a guy's back and flatten him out and then sink in a choke. You don't have that kind of time in a real-world fight. Where? Unless you're fighting out in the country somewhere where nobody's around. Or you get this unlikely scenario where you're in a dark alley and engage in a fight and nobody's there. Otherwise, here's what you're going to have. You're fighting. You're going to have people, get off him, get off him. You're going to have other people calling to break it up. You may have your opponent pulling out a knife while he's on the bottom trying to poke you. You may have his friends trying to jump you. You're not going to have this perfect scenario to sit there and execute grappling moves. It's not going to happen. And here's the truth. Almost every time I get into this debate with somebody online, the first thing I ask them, how many real-world fights have you been in? Real-world street, how many have you been in? Just be honest. Most of them come back, well, I ain't never really been in a... Okay, you're not qualified to talk about it then. And even the ones that come back, well, I've been in 2. One was a high school fight in the high school parking lot, and one was with my roommate. Okay, that's 2. That's not a big sample size. But there is people out there. We got street beats fighters, been in a lot of street fights I can vouch for just from what I know. They'll tell you, you know. Now, we got a guy named P.A. Hitman, who I got a lot of love for. He claims that he's been in a lot of street fights and used grappling, and I don't doubt him. He seems like an honorable dude. But even if that were true, I would say it's the outlier, personally. I would say that, for the most part, it's not going to be reality. Okay? Last thing I'll say is this. All right? Again, the way MMA is set up, is it the closest sport to a street fight? I'll say yes, only because in a street fight, you can use any part of your body you want. That's why I'll say yes. Otherwise, I would say that a lot of things about sporting MMA are not realistic. I know this video is getting up on 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to run through this quickly. 1, you come into the fight knowing you're getting ready to be in a fight. Most street fights don't start that way. Most street fights happen, you weren't expecting to fight. That's 1. 2, you're matched perfectly with somebody your size, your weight, and usually close to your skill level. Most street fights, no. It's going to be somebody totally different size, somebody totally different skill level. Very rarely are you evenly matched. Okay? 3, get in the fight and you start to get in a bad position, and they're going to stop. Well, we know that ain't true in a street fight. Lastly, if they don't stop, the ref's going to stop. Not true again. There's so many more we can go to. I don't go to the whole, oh, well, they can bite, and they can groin grab and all that. You know, those are minor things. Yes, they suck, but they're not going to really have an effect. Now, what I will go with is small joint manipulation. All major MMA outlaws small joint manipulation. Why? Because it fucks up grappling holds. It breaks fingers. A lot of grappling holds, you go and start bending fingers back and breaking them, it hurts the hold. You're in a different position and you're grabbing toes and breaking them. And it may sound ridiculous, but look it up. Small joint manipulation is outlawed, okay? Which really, if you think about it, don't make a lot of sense. It's a broken finger. Well, you break stuff all the time in MMA. Why outlaw it? Because it fucks up jiu-jitsu a little bit. I'm not saying it's a way to outright beat jiu-jitsu, but it does make it a lot less guaranteed, okay? So there's several things along there in MMA that aren't realistic. Again, it's the most realistic in the unreality of sporting fighting, okay? Only because you can use any weapon you got. So, you know, look, probably most of you didn't watch the full vid. Those that did, take the time. Comment on my Wu-Tang shirt if you watch the whole vid. I'm just curious how many people actually watch. Give your thoughts below. Look, it ain't got to be a bad debate. Like I said, I love MMA. Street Beef started out nothing but MMA. I'm not hating on the sport. I think it's a great sport. But I think some MMA and grappling guys are a little bit misguided. So, give your thoughts below. Peace, y'all.